First, Ruth Davidson.
Well, actually, you probably won't hear Nicola Sturgeon and me agree about much today, but one thing we do agree about is that people that are on low incomes shouldn't have as much of that money taken away in tax. That's why we raised the threshold from 5,500 up to 12,500. That's why we've raised the minimum wage and brought in a new national living wage. That's why the people at the lowest end have had the biggest pay rise in 20 years, because we believe that people are better at spending their own money rather than having the government spend it for them. The issue of tax is about, yes, absolutely, income taxes and business taxes and all the rest, paying for what we have. The reason we have a deficit is because we bring in less tax than we pay out. That means we're adding debt to our children. So we need to have it in a way that is equitable and that covers the costs that we have in our society. Now, Nicola Sturgeon raised a really interesting issue. For 13 years, the Labour Party didn't have a 50p top rate of tax. And then 3 months before they left office, they brought one in. When that was reduced to 45 pence in the pound, we actually brought in more taxes. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. And the top 1% pay 27% of all taxation in this country. The issue we have in Scotland is we've now got diverging taxes. We've hung a sign at Gretna that says higher taxes here. And we're now got a contracting economy in Scotland. We are 1/4 away from recession, and the rest of the UK is growing at 2% per year. I'm not sure that that's coincidence.
This is just
No.
Let's take in the audience before we go back to any of our panelists. There's a gentleman in a blue jumper in the second row.
Yeah, Nicola Sturgeon, your paper last year showed that there were 17,000 additional tax rate payers in Scotland, and I think your paper estimated you'd raise £50 million. What would that do to a budget deficit of £15 billion?
Well, that paper actually said we could potentially lose money if we didn't have power over tax avoidance.
That was one of 4 options in a paper that your own advisors wrote.
The point of this is, you know, Ruth talks a lot of nonsense about Scotland being the highest tax part of the UK. We're not giving higher rate taxpayers a tax cut, which means that they're paying not more than they pay just now, but more than a counterpart in England, to the tune of about £7 a week. That's less than the cost of a single NHS prescription. Your prescriptions are free in Scotland, you have to pay them in England. If you have young people going to university here, you don't have to pay £27,000 of tuition fees. If you've got an elderly parent needing care, you get free personal and nursing care. Actually, taxpayers in Scotland have the best deal of taxpayers anywhere in the UK because of the policies of the Scottish Government.
Likely to go to the university.
Quickly from Kezia Bedwell.
Nicola Sturgeon heard this woman in the front row here, this nurse, tell her that she has to go to a food bank because she doesn't have enough money. Nicola Sturgeon, you voted against a pay increase for nurses less than 10 days ago. Why on earth would you not ask the richest people in society to pay more tax to make sure that nurse can get the pay rise that she deserves?
You know that's not true, Kezia, and you vote against it. You did vote against it. You also know that because of the policies of the Scottish Government, a newly qualified nurse in Scotland is paid more than a newly qualified nurse in England.
£3,000 less than they should do.
Somebody, a starting salary in the NHS is paid £1,000 more in Scotland than in England. But
she can't feed her family.
But what I've also said is that the pay freeze that's been in place because of Tory austerity being imposed is not sustainable for the future. And you know, the SNP government have done what governments south of the border haven't done. We have always accepted the recommendations of the NHS pay review body, and we always will, because that's the right thing to do for NHS staff.
Well, let's go back to the nurse in the front row who introduced this topic. What do you think of what you've heard there?
They don't seem to be listening. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of nurse positions unfilled. And the reason of that is because it's such low paid. People can't, it's just not a sustainable, it's not a sustainable income. We can't live on it.
Can I, because I've got a lot of sympathy with what you're saying. We've had in the public sector, not just in the NHS in the last few years, a 1% pay cap. Now, the reason for that has been austerity policy, so we've tried to protect jobs in the NHS and the wider public sector. Now, when inflation was pretty close to zero, that was one thing. But as I said a moment ago, inflation is now rising. So I am absolutely clear that that pay freeze, that pay cap, is not sustainable moving forward. So we need to work with trade unions and negotiate with trade unions for fair pay, not just in the NHS, but across the public sector. And that, I think, is the difference between the Scottish Government under the SNP and a Westminster Government under the Tories. We do listen to what our public sector workers are saying, and we seek to act on what our public sector workers are saying, because we value those who work in the public sector.
Now, we haven't actually... We have not heard from David Coburn or Patrick
How many
Harvey
years have we had 1%?
I accept that.
How many? Tell me how many.
For too many. I accept
How many?
that. We've had it since about 2008.
Exactly.
I accept that.
2008, you haven't given, there's no pay rise. How do you expect somebody to live on that? We are now having to strike. Do you think that's what nurses going to nursing for? I'm telling you now, I would rather leave nursing, as would many more of my colleagues, than have to strike, because you have no idea how demoralising it is to work within the NHS. Don't come on your announced visits. Come in on the middle of any day into any ward, any A&E department. Come on in and see what we're up against.
My sister works in the National Health Service. My sister works in the National Health Service, so believe me, she tells me exactly what she thinks about those matters. But if you listen to me, I'm actually agreeing with you. We've had a really difficult period with public spending, so we've had that policy in place. We've also in Scotland, unlike in the rest of the UK, had a policy of no compulsory redundancies in the NHS and the wider public sector to try to protect jobs. That's why there have been many people in the NHS in England lost their jobs. That hasn't happened in Scotland. But as we see inflation rising, that policy is no longer sustainable. I accept that. I also think the freeze on benefits is no longer sustainable, because one of the biggest issues in this election campaign that has not been talked about enough is the fact that more and more people are being pushed into poverty. And I'm determined that the SNP will tackle that.
Let's stay on the topic we're on at the moment, and the audience are very keen to come in. So let's take the chap in the blue shirt here. We'll come to you in a moment, David, but let's take a contribution from right on the floor here. There's a chap in a blue shirt.
Hi there. I'm actually got a condition called Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism. And I live in Fife, over in Dunfermline, where there's one of the biggest tax dodgers has got a big fulfilment centre there, which the Tories have given massive tax cuts to allow to continue on. But I am also struggling on mental. I've actually had to go on a mental health waiting list to wait for somebody. I believe that if we could be able to recoup some of these taxes back from the richest of society, and we could be able to reinvest it in the NHS, we could be able to hopefully get people back into work, people who've got autism and Asperger's syndrome like myself, into work, and to be helpful people, and also as well to touch upon the benefits as well. I found it utterly disgraceful having to go to a medical and be asked, have you ever wanted to commit suicide? I felt utterly demoralised when coming out of my medical for my ESA. And then after I'd been told that I could face a £30 cut in my benefits as well.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I want to take that point. Other questions came in from the audience saying, why should we even be talking about tax rises for ordinary people, whether higher rate taxpayers, whether the basic rate, when corporations don't pay their fair share of tax?
Well, absolutely, and that's why we need to crack down on this. There have been more than 40 laws passed to try and sort that out. We're taking more in. They've set up a new department within HMRC to try and crack down on it. But the gentleman there is absolutely right when it comes to Amazon over the water in Dunfermline and the subsidy that was given by the Scottish Government when it pays poverty wages. We need to make sure that corporations pay their share. Now, it's really tough when they work very hard not to. We're cracking down on it. We see them moving in other countries, but we're absolutely committed to it. Yes, there's more to do, but we have made advances and we're taking in a lot more than the previous government did.
Excuse me, but the thing is this, why is it then that you've got more tax inspectors checking vulnerable people in society, whereas you've got less tax inspectors checking like the works of Amazon, Apple and Google and all the other companies like that and all that. I feel that I'm under surveillance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that does that help people's mental health? No, it doesn't.
No, thank you very much for that. And a lot of people do feel that more effort has gone into scrutinising individuals than into corporations. Patrick Harvey, we haven't heard from you on this.
Well, I mean, it's undeniable, I think, that we need more progressive taxation, and I think people on an MSP salary, for example, can afford to pay more tax. The Greens actually have shown that we can do that without increasing tax for people on low or average incomes. We can break the basic rate and actually cut the tax bill for people on low incomes while ensuring that wealthy people pay a bit more. We did manage to persuade the SNP to scrap a proposed tax break for high earners. We managed to persuade them to scrap a tax break. Do you mind? We managed to persuade them to scrap a tax break for high earners. We will need to push them to go further than that, but it's absolutely about more than just income tax. And I have very little sympathy for people who are now arguing that they want a policy for what England and Wales should have as its income tax rates if we're not willing to have progressive taxation here in Scotland. But it's about more than just income. The gentleman here is absolutely right about corporations. And to hear Ruth Davidson say that they've been cracking down on corporate taxation, they have been persistently reducing the rate of corporation tax year after year after year, whether it was a Labour government, a coalition government, or a Tory government. That corporate tax contribution has gone down and down and down in a race to the bottom. So we absolutely need to be looking at a wide range of forms of wealth and income inequality if we want to be serious about raising the revenue that's needed to meet the social need that we all have. Every single one of us depends on public services, and if we're not willing to make a contribution to that, a fair contribution, I think we should all be ashamed of ourselves as a society. I think very many people do want to ensure that that happens. The UK and Scottish governments need to be changing direction to make it happen.
All right, thanks for that, Patrick. Now, Nicola Sturgeon, you want to specifically address the point raised by our audience member.
This is a Westminster election, and one of the biggest responsibilities of a Westminster government is the social security system. And the gentleman here has just mentioned a policy that, frankly, I think Ruth Davidson should be asked to justify tonight. Disabled people are having £30 a week removed from their benefit. They're having their motability vehicles taken away. Disabled people are being dragged to assessments where they're treated like criminals and asked to justify themselves. All while the Tories are proposing even more reductions to corporation tax and tax cuts for the richest people in our society. It is utterly shameful that the policies of this Tory government are driving more disabled people into poverty. And I really do think this debate should not end tonight without Ruth Davidson having to defend these outrageous, despicable, cruel and callous policies.
Ruth Davidson.
Firstly, there are more people on PIP at the higher rate than on DLA. It has more focus on people with mental health issues than the old DLA had, which was on £30. Nobody is having that taken off them, and you're scaremonger to say that it is. They're changing. No, and I'm saying the movement from DLA to PIP, there's more people on it, so it's a different form of benefit to help you with the extra needs that you have. If you've got a physical disability or a mental disability, if it means you can't get yourself to the shops, it helps pay for a taxi to get you there and back, for example. There's also more money that's being put into, and this is where I think there's some really great work being done in closing the disability employment gap, because people like this gentleman here say they want to get back into employment, but there's barriers into employment. That's why everybody who's now getting helped with a jobs coach, helping people with their needs, there's extra money being put in to help folk do that. We want to be able to have the employment gap.
800 people a week right now are having their motability cards taken away.
There are 70,000 more motability cards that have been issued now since 2010. That's simply true. There are 70,000 more now than there were in 2010.
So the 800 people a week that are getting them taken away don't exist? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that there are more now than there were before. We can trade statistics all day. What we are trying to do is ensure that there is a big gap right now between people who have disabilities and there are employers that feel that they are, I don't know whether it's scared or whether they don't feel confident enough to support them, whether people themselves don't have access. We are investing money to make sure that we have that disability employment gap so that we can try and get people to have the dignity of a job because they want to be independent, because they want to work. I don't think that that's a bad thing.
We're coming towards the end of the programme where we don't have time to get into new issues. We haven't heard from David Coburn on tax. Quickly, if you will.
Well, quite frankly, modern governments have discovered that if they put unreasonable taxes on people, they simply move and take their talent and their work with them. So I would say it would be very, very bad appalling for Scotland if our taxes in Scotland were higher than those in the rest of the UK. We'd simply be uncompetitive. I don't want to see that happen. But on the other hand, I'm on the Panama Committee in the European Parliament, which sounds very luxurious and fun, but it's not. It's about looking into shady places where corporations are stacking their money. And believe you me, I've heard a few interesting tales. And I think that there should be some serious looking into that department.
Right,
and that has not been done. And that's thanks to the Tories.
David Coburn, thank you
but
for
again,
that.
if we have higher taxes in Scotland, you can forget us being competitive. We need to keep people in Scotland working, building their businesses, and making sure they employ their fellow Scots.
That's it, David Coburn. Thank you very much for that. And I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. So thank you very much to all of our panel, to all the politicians for joining us tonight, and to our audience.
Meet a trio here who've had plenty to say over the last 90 minutes. We have political editor of the Daily Record, David Clegg, the author and columnist, David Torrance, and Richard Walker of The National. Firstly, David Clegg, what do you think of the dynamic tonight and what we've seen?
Well, I think the dynamic started by being between Nicola Sturgeon and Ruth Davidson, which is a bit of a change. Usually these kind of debates in previous years have between the SNP and the Labour Party. This time it's very clearly between the SNP and the Conservatives. But the most memorable moment of the night certainly was the nurse, who really gave Nicola Sturgeon a much more difficult time than any of the politicians on the panel did tonight. It was the nurse who talked about not being able to afford food on the salary of a nurse, and really brought the point home over quite an extended period. I've never seen Nicola Sturgeon look quite so uncomfortable on television before.
David Torrance, I think that's what is so good about debates like this, because you don't know what is going to happen, and often something very nuanced and personal can turn it.
And all the more effective, as David says, coming from somebody in the audience as opposed to another party leader. But it also shows you how jumbled up different policy responsibilities get in elections these days. You know, that in the era of devolution, people no longer differentiate adequately between devolved responsibilities like health and education and reserved issues, which is, after all, what a UK general election is supposed to be about. It just all gets bundled up into the same mix. And perhaps we shouldn't even bother trying in this context, because it doesn't seem that voters do.
Rich, who do you think performed best?
I think Nicola Sturgeon performed best, but I think certainly she was a clear winner in the first half.
But do you feel she was under pressure, as we've heard from, most notably, the nurse in the audience?
I think those are difficult questions, particularly about... she faced difficult questions about nurses' pay and about education. In education, she accepted responsibility for that, and she said that she's dealing with it. I think both those issues are devolved issues, and while it's perfectly fair to discuss them, I think they are not the issues that we are voting on just now, and I think it should be pointed out that those are not the main issues for this election. And I think there are other issues that should have been discussed, and I think as well that the Labour Party in particular were more concerned with the SNP's record as government in Holyrood than dealing with austerity policies that were introduced by the Tories in Westminster.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I have to hurry you. We're heading towards the end of the programme. That's what the journalists think. A quick reaction now from Murdo Fraser of the Scottish Conservatives and Joanna Cherry of the SNP. Oh, to be a fly on the wall at this table. Now, your leaders, as I think we have gathered here, have dominated the debate tonight. Murdo, Ruth Davidson can't really escape the fact that she was a Remainer and she's had to vote fast and she's had to defend Brexit.
Yes, but that's democracy. You know, the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave the EU. The important thing is, how do we get the best possible deal? And that's achieved by the Scottish Government working together with the UK Government. The problem is the Scottish Government's got no interest in getting a good deal for the UK. They want to use this to engineer a second independence referendum. And that's really what this election is about. And Nicola Sturgeon's made it very clear, every vote for an SNP candidate in this election is a vote for a second independence referendum.
Joanna Cherry, what about that plea from the member of the audience and her statement to Nicola Sturgeon, don't come on your announced visits? How did she react to that? Did she react well? Did she manage to rebut?
I think what she did was she explained to the nurse that under the SNP, Scottish Government in Scotland, have done more to protect pay and jobs in the NHS than anywhere else in the UK.
But did that hit
Even the
home?
BBC says that the NHS in Scotland is run better than it is in England and Wales. And the unfortunate truth is, if the lady in the audience, the nurse, lived in England or Wales, she would have worse paying conditions. But I think the real story of tonight, Jackie, is that for Ruth Davidson this evening, the mask has slipped when she is put under scrutiny about the real issues in this election, which is the record of the Tory party in London, she goes to pieces. She was unable to defend Brexit this evening. She received a lecture from the audience on Nicola Sturgeon on the economics and the benefits of immigration, and she went to pieces when she was called upon to defend the Tories' toxic policies on pensioners and
Joanna,
tax
I'll have to
credits.
stop you there as well, Murdo. Joanna, thank you. Let's talk to another couple of journalists. We've got Severin Carroll, the Scotland editor of The Guardian, and Lindsay Bewes from the Press Association. We've spoken a lot tonight so far about the four main parties. What about UKIP and the Greens? What was their influence, if anything?
Well, David Coburn is very much a bystander in this election. And I think on this occasion, this is one of his few moments he's going to have in the limelight, being able to make any attempt to be able to interject UKIP into this particular election. I'm not at all clear he had any success. He was much more the person kind of shouting from the fringes. Patrick Harvey is a much more experienced performer. He's used to performing at First Minister's Questions. He is a seasoned campaigner, and he's much more able to kind of present a much more rational, focused party position for the Scottish Green Party.
Yeah, they really didn't get to contribute a whole lot. It was really all about Nicola Sturgeon versus Ruth Davidson, particularly at the start there on Brexit and the independence referendum. Kes Dugdale coming in strong on education and health. Willie Rennie, a few cheers for him on his Brexit stance, and a few cheers for him on issues like mental health and education as well.
OK, thank you. Let's talk to two of our politicians. Very, very animated Jackie Baillie during the debate tonight. What about Kezia Dugdale's impact on it? Did we learn any more about Labour Party policy over the last 90 minutes?
Oh, I absolutely think we did. And what we heard very strongly from Kezia was a complete rejection of a second divisive independence referendum. That came across very clearly. But in addition to that, what I thought was most interesting was our focus on jobs, the economy, investing in the NHS and in education. And what we heard tonight from the audience was the real lived experience of teachers talking about failing standards, of nurses talking about having to use food banks. That exposed the record of the SNP and indeed the Tories, who remain the party of austerity in the United Kingdom. And frankly, I think this election has to be about more than the Constitution, but it doesn't surprise me that the SNP and the Tories just want to talk about the Constitution because it saves any focus on their failing policies.
Alex Hamilton, did any of Willie Rennie's points hit home?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a proud man tonight. I think Willie's was pitch perfect on our core message, which makes us absolutely distinct in this election, which is we want Scotland strong at the heart of the UK and the UK strong at the heart of Europe. I think he carried the room on things like the Brexit deal referendum question, and particularly about the profound lack of investment in mental health and the SNP's failure to address education and the problems in our education system in Scotland.
Well, I think we're going to be joined now by our political editor, Brian Taylor, who should be hot-footing it from our other press room. There you are, Brian. Obviously, the people we've spoken to, the politicians notably, saying that their man or women did well. In your view, who is going home happiest tonight?
Struck by several points. Struck by the fact that the sharpest debates were on issues that are actually devolved to Holyrood, which is nowadays income tax and also over education. Struck by the battles between Ruth Davidson and Nicola Sturgeon, but also Nicola Sturgeon and Kezia Dugdale on who stands up best, if you like, for Scotland. Struck really, and also another little point to bear in mind, right at the very beginning, we have a strategy from the Conservatives saying, last year in the Holyrood election, saying they can form the opposition. Willie Rennie saying that at this election, saying they can form the opposition in Westminster. We now have Kezia Dugdale joining that list in effect. She said if the polls are right, the Tories are winning, and she said she wants a Labour government, but in reality seemed to be conceding that it was extremely unlikely, and therefore putting herself forward, positing herself as being the party that would stand up most vigorously against the Conservatives. That is an intriguing element in this contest.
OK, we've got Andrew Nicola, the Sun, who's, if I can, this is a surprise, if I can interrupt you, filing your copy for tomorrow. What is your headline? What is your top line? What are you telling your readers?
So far, the nurse is the big story. It would be lovely to know who she is, lovely to know more about her. And it's, again, a little bit disappointing that this is not a Westminster issue that's being discussed here. But I think that's what's going to hit home with people watching the debate on the TVs at home.
Do you think we learned anything new tonight?
No, I don't think we did.
Consensus breaks out in the press room. That doesn't happen. Well, let's end tonight. The final word goes to Sarah Smith. Sarah, come over and join me. You've emerged from the heat of the debate. How would you sum it up?
Well, I think it's interesting people are saying we were discussing issues that are devolved. We are, but they're the issues the audience wanted to talk about, that they sent in the most questions about. And of course, the way the Scottish Government has performed does inform how people are going to vote. People care passionately about education and health, and how the SNP have done over the last 10 years, and that will make a difference, even if it shouldn't, because those are devolved issues. On the things like Brexit, which are, of course, Westminster's responsibilities, we saw the sharp dividing lines there. Nicola Sturgeon very keen to tell us that, of course, a vote for the SNP will put a strong Scottish voice into the negotiations, with the other parties disagreeing with her on that, and we saw the different positions. Ruth Davidson possibly a little bit uncomfortable being reminded of her Remainer past now that she's supporting Theresa May's version of Brexit, but I agree with some of your other commentators. It was the audience who were the stars tonight.